Hi, welcome to Your Stars Within. I'm Little Wave, and today what I want to talk about is the upcoming Venus retrograde. It's difficult to talk about the Venus retrograde without talking about some of the other retrogrades that are also happening around the same time. So May 11th, we have Saturn going retrograde. Then May 13th, we have Venus going retrograde. And May 15th, we have Jupiter going retrograde. We also have a Mercury retrograde sometime in June. So all of these are happening in a really short, condensed period of time, and so they interact with each other. So I'm going to focus our video on the Venus retrograde to help you understand that, but I'm going to pull in pieces of these other retrogrades because I think that they're really relevant. So if you know how to pull up your chart, what I would look at is where the Venus retrograde is happening. So it is happening in Gemini. It starts at 21 degrees Gemini, and it's going to retro all the way back to 5 degrees Gemini, and go forward again past 21. So it starts on May the 13th. It will May 13th. It will retro back to 5 degrees on June the 25th, where it goes forward, and it'll be completely past its initial spot, the 21st, 21 degrees on July the 29th. Now, just to already know, when we think about a retrograde, we don't talk about it as a retrograde until it starts retrograding, right? But it actually has already been coming through all of the degrees it's going to affect since about April the 10th. So from 5 degrees Gemini on April the 10th, comes all the way to 21 here on May the 13th, where it retros back to 5 degrees, right, on, give me my date again, June the 25th, and then out past the 21st by July 29th. All right, so that's really, so we've already really gotten the first view in a way of what it's going to be about. We just often don't recognize it until it starts retrograding and being brought more into our inner consciousness. People are often afraid of retrogrades. Retrogrades are not something to fear, and they're not something bad. What a retrograde really is energy internalized. So what's usually external energy with Venus, relationships and socializing and friends, is becoming internal. Many of us are in a quarantine, and so internal retrograde energy can actually be really good for a time period like this. But it's more about the inner incubation, right? Sacred incubation. Processing, reflecting, reassessing, right? Looking within for the answers. As the retrograde ceases and goes direct again, we will take the information that we received from that internal reflection and we'll express it in action in the outside world, right? We'll take action on what we realized. So retrograde's generally not a time for action, definitely not a time for new action. So you don't necessarily want new relationships. I wouldn't even necessarily say it's a great time for breakups because you're likely to redo whatever you do in a retrograde. It's not a good time to buy a house. Sometimes because Venus has to do with values, like your personal values, but also the value of things. Sometimes items bought in Venus retrograde, either you're getting a great deal and the other person is maybe selling too cheap, or you may regret what you bought later, realizing you paid too much for it. Because Venus can beautify. So sometimes something can seem much more attractive than it may actually seem once that retrograde leaves. So with this particular retrograde, it's in Gemini, like we said. So take a look in your chart where Gemini is. Between 5 and 21 degrees, do you have any planets or points there? It's going to opposite anything in those same degrees between 5 and 21 of Sagittarius. And then it's going to square anything in those degrees, 5 to 21 degrees, of Pisces or Virgo. So take a look at your chart if you know how to do that, and see how this Venus retrograde is going to particularly affect you. You will have those degrees in at least a house, even if there's no planet or point, so I would know what house that's in. And it's interesting to note if it retros back into a previous house and then comes forward, you know, if it's between houses or if it's all encapsulated in a single house. Okay, so what is this going to mean? Well, I want to talk about a couple things that are going to happen around the Venus retrograde. First of all, Saturn's going to retrograde, or started retrograding, May 11th, okay, at 1 degrees Aquarius. Now, as many of you know, Saturn has been a big part of this Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which a big part of this coronavirus and all of this that's going on was triggered with Jupiter there, but it was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So that's important to know. But since then, Saturn has moved on. It kind of did its duty of karma to the Pluto process. Pluto's still there, which I talk about in other videos, and is retrograding back right now towards that degree that the coronavirus initiated. So that's a different process. Saturn has since moved on. Saturn is now moved on into 1 degree Aquarius. He's going to retro back to 25 degrees Capricorn, which does re-trigger a little bit of coronavirus stuff because that's where it met up with Jupiter. But it's going to come back, and as he comes back to that 1 degree mark in February of 21, he's going to make a square aspect with Uranus. Saturn and Uranus square is going to be a major aspect in February of 21. So Saturn went from, you know, kind of the karmic trigger of the virus to the part of the revolution, part of the change, because Uranus is going to be the change in the revolution. What I see is probably small communities. So that's sort of a separate process, but I think it's important to know that what Saturn's doing now, he's moved on from the virus itself to the rebellion. And at the end of this retrograde, he's going to meet up with Uranus. So I think that's important. The other thing that's going to happen, Venus, when she's done retrograding, all the way done, she gets past that 21 degree mark, and on July 29th, she's going to meet up with the nodes of the moon. She's going to meet up with the North Node at 26 degrees Gemini, just after that on August 4th. So that orients us towards our lives and our values aligning with our true path, our truest life direction. So that happens at the end of this retrograde. All right? So with Saturn and Venus retrograding essentially around the same time, the 11th and the 13th, we have this kind of similar energy with Jupiter. Jupiter played a significant role in the coronavirus situation, the Pluto-Saturn, and he retrogrades at 27 degrees Capricorn on the 15th. Okay, so these are all happening together. So what is this saying to me? Well, this is saying to me that the common issues that come up with Venus, relationships, right, friends, we're in Gemini, maybe you're going to find out about some two-faced friends, social contacts. I think there's going to be 2 roads. I think you need to choose which life, which road, which path is yours. What is in your highest alignment? So to me, this is about a reassessment of one's values. Multiple worlds or dimensions are going to split off from this, you know, Uranus-Saturn conjunction that's going to happen. People are going to take many different roads coming out of this coronavirus, okay? The rebellion is going to take each of us into very different choices. So this Venus retrograde is an opportunity to really go inward and reflect on what belongs in that future. Because this is a really major crossroad, right? Gemini is the twins, but they're holding hands. They can let go, right? Unlike Pisces that's interlocked, which is also a dual sign, but it cannot actually swim in 2 different directions. The twins can. And so a road is going to be chosen. Who belongs in your life? What relationships, romantic and otherwise? Who are you in the world? How do you show up? How do you communicate? Right? What are you communicating? What do you bring to the world? And so at the end of this retrograde, the beginning of the retrograde, we've got Saturn in there. So to me, that's old karma. Old karmic relationships need to be released. Old karma with people needs to be complete, needs to be paid off. It's time to be done. Done with old world karma, old ancestral karma. Be done with it. Forgive and move on. Ask for forgiveness and move on. Make right what we can make right. Karma is done. We move out of that limitation, out of that restricted love. Saturn and Venus together restrict love, right? Out of that restricted heart space into aligning with our truest path, with that which sings to the soul, right? Where we live life in the now, where we trust, where we leap, where we dance, where we play, where we're creative, because we're in our truest path, our North Node, what we are here on this earth to do. Align with your highest calling, because that's Venus in the North Node. And of course, oppositing Venus, when it conjuncts the North Node, will be the South Node. So again, another reflection towards old karma. So do you choose the road of the old karma? Are you going to stay there, that old three-dimensional reality? Or are we moving into the new earth, the 5D, the, joyous communities of synchronicity and of sharing, right? So let that lightness sink in. Become present into the here and now. That's all you have to do to enter the fifth dimensional new earth, is to be present here. You don't have to bring the old stress, the old needs, the lack. We can just playfully dance into the new world that we're creating, because there's plenty for all. There's no need and place for greed. That's the old world crumbling, the old values crumbling. So the location, the house of this Venus retrograde will tell us a lot about where your old karma is, what needed to be paid off. It will tell us, what area of your life that value is under review. And it tells us where that north node is just coming into, because the node's just shifted into Gemini, right at 29 degrees Gemini. So it's going to meet up with Venus at 26 in August. So for the next year and a half, the nodes are going to be in Gemini with the south node in Sagittarius. So taking a look at what houses that's affecting, because that's the area of life you're being called into. That's where your path is right now. Just to let you know, Mercury and Venus are going to conjunct on May the 22nd. So if you're not sure how this applies to you, I think you'll know on May 22nd or right around then. It should help raise it into consciousness or mental understanding. If you're having trouble with that, you can always seek a reading. If you'd like some guidance around, how this is specifically affecting you. But I think just looking at it, even if you didn't know astrology, just looking at what's going on in your life around the 22nd should help to bring to awareness what this is about for you. So relationships, values, connections, abundance, beautifying, money. Is there enough, right? What are your values around these things? What do you value in friendships? What do you give to them? This is an opportunity to take a deep look inside of these pieces. And if this Venus retrograde is going to conjunct any of your planets or points, it's going to really particularly affect you. You're going to really feel it. And it'll be pointing to that area, whatever that planet or point suggests. Then it's going to be very personal. So Venus retrograde's about every 18 months, but in a different sign. So a previous Venus retrograde may not have been as impactful as this one might be if it hits a particular planet or point. Or maybe a previous one was really impactful and this one will have a lighter effect. So it's really important to kind of take a look at where in your chart that's happening. But so what I can tell you is that old karma, it's doing its last kind of raking through you to pay it off. Release it and be done. And sometimes you have to allow others to pay it off. Sometimes your freedom is in the forgiveness, is in the allowing the debt to be paid so that you don't have to stay in that dimensional space anymore, right? Regardless of whether they've apologized, regardless of whether they deserve it. Forgiveness is for you so that you can release that old energy of resentment and move into the lightness of joy and play. So I hope that's helpful to you. Please reach out. Let me know if there's anything that I can do to help you better understand or utilize these retrogrades. I wish you all the best. Namaste.